Sir, with respect, I don't know what else to try. The words came out of Senior Airman Brett Colton's mouth with the flat resignation of a man who has exhausted his professional vocabulary and has arrived at its outer wall. Colton was 26 years old, the youngest member of the Rotary Wing maintenance team at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and he had been on the hangar floor since 4:30 in the morning, with his hands inside the turbine section of an A-64E Apache that had become, over the previous 31 hours, the most expensive and most stubborn problem anyone in the 101st Combat Aviation Brigade had encountered in the current maintenance cycle. He was not a man who admitted defeat easily. He had the build of someone who grew up hauling things, and the focus of someone who had decided early that the machines were worth understanding all the way down, and he had applied both of those qualities to this engine for the better part of 2 working days, and had nothing to show for it, except a cleaner understanding of everything the fault was not. He looked at the engine. The engine, predictably, said nothing. Behind him, the hangar held the particular atmosphere of a controlled professional crisis. Overhead lights at full intensity. 3-wheeled tool carts in a semicircle around the right engine bay. 2 laptops cycling through a fault tree that had now run 4 times without a root cause. And 6 technicians in the postures of people who have been solving the same problem too long. One sat with his forearms on his knees and his head down. One stood with arms folded, staring at a point to the left of the engine bay, as if the answer might be there. Staff Sergeant Monique Darby, 12 years in Rotary Wing maintenance, who had seen most things, leaned against the fuselage with a mug of coffee she had stopped drinking an hour ago, watching Colton's announcement land. The aircraft was JRT configured, mission-ready markings, full avionics suite operational, one of 6 Apaches scheduled to support a joint readiness training rotation beginning in 72 hours. The other 5 were ready. This one had developed a fault in the T700 GE701D turbine controller that had defeated every standard approach, produced fault codes that contradicted each other, and caused the diagnostic software to return a result that the software was not actually capable of returning. A result that the software developers, when reached by phone that morning, had described as theoretically impossible and had been unable to explain. Colonel Patricia Ames, commander of the 101st Cab, had been in the hangar for 4 hours. She was compact, close-cut hair going silver, with the economical stillness of someone who has learned to hold authority without performing it. She had made 6 calls this morning, 2 to GE Aviation, 1 to Redstone Arsenal, 1 to the Army Aviation Desk at the Pentagon, and 2 to higher headquarters where she had secured a 48-hour extension on the jerk rotation she did not want to need. She had 1 call left. She did not want to make it, not because she doubted it, but because it required admitting the problem was beyond her organization's reach. A warrant officer she trusted had given her the name and said, "If the engine won't talk to the computer, call the man who understood the engine before the computer existed." She stepped away from the group and dialed. The phone rang 4 times before it was answered, which was itself a form of information, not the answer of a man waiting by the phone, but the answer of a man who had been doing something else and had gotten to it when he got to it. "Yes, Mr. Aldridge," Colonel Ames had been told. He did not use rank. "My name is Patricia Ames. I command the 101st Combat Aviation Brigade at Fort Campbell. I was given your number by Chief Warrant Officer 5 Sal Reyes, who said that if I had an engine problem I could not solve, you were the man to call." A pause, not a long one. "What engine?" "T700 GE701D. Apache, 31 hours on the fault. 4 diagnostic cycles. The software is returning a result the developers say is impossible. My team has eliminated every standard root cause. The silence that followed had a different texture than the earlier pause. It had the quality of a man considering something rather than simply waiting. What's the impossible result? She told him the fault code and the anomalous software output. She read it precisely, the way she read everything, without embellishment. Another silence. Then, has it been run since the anomaly first appeared? No, we've kept it static for diagnostics. What's the ambient temperature in your hangar right now? She looked at the wall-mounted gauge visible through the hangar door. She told him, and at the time of the first fault presentation, she checked her log. She told him. He said, I think I know what it is. He said it the way a man says a thing when he knows it and is calculating how to communicate it. It's not in the fault tree. It's a thermal differential response in the fuel control unit that presents identically to a controller fault because the diagnostic architecture wasn't designed to distinguish between them. The software can't return a valid result because neither of the fault models it carries matches what's actually happening. Ames was quiet for a moment. Around her, 3 of her technicians had stopped what they were doing. Can it be fixed in the field? Yes, but not with your current procedure set. There's a calibration sequence that predates the digital controller. It was developed for the analog fuel control system on the T700's predecessor, and it still applies because the underlying thermodynamics haven't changed. It's not in any current technical manual because it was superseded when the digital controller was fielded. How do you know this? A pause that was different from the others, shorter, and with something quieter in it. I was on the team that developed the original calibration procedure, he said. In 1977. Colonel Patricia Ames looked at the Apache across the hangar. She looked at it for a moment with the expression of a woman who has just learned that the solution to her problem is 47 years old and has been sitting in someone's memory the entire time. Mr. Aldridge, she said. Would you be willing to come to Fort Campbell? He arrived the following morning in a truck that had put in as many miles as trucks put in when they belong to someone who goes places and does not consider going places a remarkable activity. He was 79 years old, and he came through the hangar door with the unhurried directness of a man who has been told where the problem is and is going to it. And he looked nothing like what the 6 technicians and 1 staff sergeant and 1 young senior airman had been picturing during the 12 hours since the colonel had told them help was coming. Emmett Aldridge wore a canvas work shirt the color of dried grass, simple dark work trousers, and boots that had been in contact with every kind of grease and floor and weather that a career in turbine engineering produces, and had been cleaned enough times to show the effort without hiding the history. His white hair was cut short. His face was the face of a man who had spent decades in hangars and on flight lines and in test facilities in the Mojave Desert and the Georgia heat and places that were hot for reasons other than climate, and it showed all of this, without complaint. His hands, when he set his small tool case on the bench inside the door and unlatched it, were the hands of a man for whom tools are an extension of thought, the knuckles large, the fingers deliberate, every motion carrying the specific economy of someone for whom wasted motion has never been an option. He did not introduce himself. He looked at the Apache. Which engine bay? He said. Right side, Staff Sergeant Darby said. She had appointed herself his point of contact without anyone asking her to, on the grounds that she was the most senior technician available, and also because something in the way he had come through the door had told her this was the right call. He went to the right engine bay and looked at the turbine section with the focused attention of a man reading a page he has read before. He did not touch anything yet. He looked at the fuel control unit access panel, at the cooling line routing, at the positioning of the inlet sensor relative to the exhaust stack, and he looked at all of this for nearly 2 minutes in the complete silence of someone who does not need to perform the looking. Then he said, what was the duty cycle before the fault presented? How many hours in the 48 hours prior? Darby had the logs. She read him the figures. He nodded once. And the operating altitude in the last mission block? She told him. Another nod. He reached into his tool case and removed 3 things. A calibrated thermometer probe of a design that nobody in the hangar had seen before. A small analog gauge that looked like it belonged in a museum dedicated to the history of aviation instrumentation, and a folded piece of paper that he opened and smoothed against the side of the aircraft with his palm. The paper had handwriting on it, dense, precise, in pencil, organized in columns, and it was not new paper. The edges were soft from years of handling, and the fold lines were white with age, but the writing was still legible in the specific way that careful handwriting remains legible across decades when the paper has been treated well. Colton, standing 6 feet away, looked at the paper, and then looked at Darby. Darby was watching the old man's hands. "What is that?" Colton said. Emmett Aldridge looked up briefly. "Calibration tables," he said, "for the thermal differential procedure. I wrote these in 1977. I've carried them since because I always thought we might need them again." He looked back at the engine. I was right more times than I expected. He began the procedure. The smell of the GE test facility in Lynn, Massachusetts in January 1977 was turbine exhaust and machine oil, and the dry cold of a New England winter coming through gaps in a building built for function and not for comfort. Emmett Aldridge was 32 years old, bent over a fuel control unit on a test bench with the thermometer probe and a legal pad. The focused attention of a man who has located the reason for a problem nobody else has found. The T-700 was 6 years in development, the engine that would power the Black Hawk and the Apache. The people building it understood what that meant, not abstractly, but in the weighted way people understand things when the machines they build will carry others into places where reliability is the difference between coming home and not. The problem he had found was this same problem, at high altitude combined with specific temperature differential conditions. The fuel control unit's analog calibration drifted in a way the standard procedure, developed at sea level, never caught. The drift produced fault symptoms identical to controller failure, and finding it had required 3 months of test data and a specific kind of thinking that his section chief, a former Navy machinist named Roy Callahan, working on turbine engines since Korea, called knowing how to ask the question the machine is actually answering. Callahan had retired 2 months earlier, gone back to a house near the water in Bangor, Maine that he'd been meaning to reach since 1958. He had handed Emmett the thermometer probe on his last day. "This goes with you," he had said. "You're the one who'll need it." Emmett had needed it 11 times in 47 years. This was the 12th. Callahan died in 1989 in the house in Bangor, and Emmett had gone to the service and stood in the back because the church was full, and he had thought about the probe and the calibration tables and what it means to carry someone forward in the form of the knowledge they gave you. The Massachusetts winter dissolved. The Fort Campbell hangar reassembled around him. He completed the first stage of the calibration sequence, checked the analog gauge, wrote a number in the margin of the tables, and moved to the second. Darby watched his hands. She had 12 years in rotary wing maintenance and a working vocabulary for competence. She could assess it in the first 5 minutes of watching someone work. And what she was watching now was outside the range her vocabulary covered. Not fast. Not flashy. The movement of someone for whom the gap between intention and execution had been reduced, over decades, to essentially nothing. Watching it produced the specific feeling of watching something that makes you understand how much further there is still to go. She stepped away from the aircraft, took out her phone, and called CW5 Hassan in the Brigade Aviation Safety Office, someone she had known for 6 years who would still be at his desk. "Pull everything you can find on a man named Emmett Aldridge," she said. GE Aviation, T-700 program, 70s and 80s. Army Aviation Systems Command. Public record only. 5 minutes. Hassan called back in 4. His voice was different. Not shocked. Because Hassan was constitutionally resistant to shock, but recalibrated, which in Hassan was the equivalent. "Where is he right now?" "In my hangar." "Fixing the engine. Get the colonel there," he said. Monique, whoever on this base understands what the T-700 program meant, what the Black Hawk and Apache meant to Army aviation, find them. Because I've been doing this 18 years, and I've never had a chance to be in the same room with someone like this. I think you should fix that before he finishes and gets back in his truck. She went to get the colonel. Colonel Ames came into the hangar with the same direct stride she brought to everything, and she stopped when she saw the calibration tables smoothed against the aircraft's fuselage. And she looked at them, and then at the old man working beside them. And she was quiet for a moment. She moved to the edge of the working area and watched. She watched the way Darby had been watching, with the specific attention of a senior officer taking inventory of something she will need to account for later. Emmett Aldridge completed the 3rd stage of the calibration sequence and checked the analog gauge and made 2 small adjustments and checked again. He straightened. He looked at the fuel control unit access panel. He said, "Start her up." Colton looked at Darby. Darby looked at the colonel. The colonel nodded. They ran the startup sequence. The T-700 turbine engine turned over, spooled up through its start cycle, and settled into the steady roar of a machine doing what it was designed to do. The fault codes did not return. The diagnostic software ran its cycle and returned a clean result. The engine ran. The hangar was quiet for a moment in the particular way that quiet arrives after a sound that has been absent too long finally returns. Colton sat down on the floor with his back against the tool cart, which was not a professional posture, and was also the only honest posture available to him at that moment. "How?" he said. "Not to anyone. Just the word by itself." Emmett Aldridge was wiping his hands on a cloth from his tool case. He did not look particularly different from how he had looked before the engine started. The thermal differential in the fuel control unit was preventing the controller from reading a valid pressure signal on startup, he said. The calibration procedure resets the baseline reference point before the controller initializes. Once the baseline is correct, the controller reads the signal correctly. He folded the cloth. The fault codes were real. They just weren't telling you what caused them. Darby said, "That procedure. It's not in any current manual." No, he reached for the calibration tables and began to fold them. It was superseded. The assumption was that the digital controller had made it unnecessary. It had, until this particular combination of operating conditions recreated the original problem. How did you know this combination of conditions was possible? He paused in the folding of the paper, looked at it for a moment. "Because Roy Callahan told me it would be," he said. In 1977. He said thermal differential faults don't go away because you put a computer in front of them. They wait. He finished folding the paper and put it in his shirt pocket. He was right. Colonel Ames stepped forward. Emmett looked at her. "Miss Aldridge," she held his gaze with the direct attention she gave everything. "I've been told some of your record. Not all of it. Most of it's not interesting," he said. "I'll make my own assessment of that." She looked at his tool case, at the probe, at the analog gauge, at the space where the calibration tables had been. The T-700 program. You were on the original engineering team. I was. The fuel control system documentation at the program office, I made a call to Redstone this morning before you arrived. The archivist said the original calibration procedures were attributed to a working group that predated the digital documentation system. No individual names in the record. That was common then, Emmett said. It was program work, not personal. Roy Callahan, the colonel said. The archivist mentioned that name. He said Callahan was the technical lead on the T-700 fuel system from 1969 to 1977, and that the engine that flew the first Black Hawk prototype was running on calibration procedures Callahan had developed. She paused. He also said that Callahan had a proc who continued that work after his retirement and who is credited, without being named, in 3 separate amendments to the technical baseline. Emmett said nothing. The unnamed individual in those amendments, the colonel said. Was that you? Emmett Aldridge looked at the engine. It was still running, the sound of it filling the hangar with the low, steady authority of a machine that has remembered what it is for. Roy did the real work, he said. I just kept it going. The colonel was quiet for a moment. Then she turned to face the hangar, the technicians, the aircraft, the tool carts, the 2 laptops still running. And her voice took on the quality of someone making a record that will outlast the moment. This is Emmett Aldridge. 31 years as a turbine engineer, GE Aviation, Army Aviation Systems Command, the Army's Airworthiness Qualification Test Directorate. He was on the original engineering team for the T-700 turbine engine, the engine in every Black Hawk and Apache in United States Army inventory. He worked under Roy Callahan, the technical architect of the T-700 fuel system, and continued Callahan's work for 20 years after his retirement. The calibration procedure he used this morning predates every digital technical manual in this brigade. It exists in this hangar because he wrote it down in 1977 and carried the paper in his tool case for 47 years, because he believed it would be needed again. She paused. He was correct. She looked at Colton, who was still sitting against the tool cart. At Darby, who had the expression of someone who has revised a significant number of things in a short period of time and is not finished. At the other 4 technicians who had been awake for 31 hours and were looking at an old man in a canvas work shirt with the focused attention of people who have just understood something important about the nature of expertise. There will be a formal documentation effort beginning Monday, the colonel said. The calibration procedure Mr. Aldridge used this morning will be recorded, validated, and submitted to the program office for technical baseline incorporation. It should have been in the manual 40 years ago. We are correcting that now. She looked at Emmett. With Mr. Aldridge's assistance, if he's willing. Emmett looked at the engine. At the calibration table's absence in his shirt pocket, the familiar weight of them there. I'll write it up properly, he said. Roy always said it should have been written up properly. I kept telling myself I'd get to it. You're getting to it, the colonel said. She rendered a salute then, clean, held, directed at a man in a canvas work shirt with grease on his right thumb and a folded piece of paper in his pocket, and held it for the count that salutes are held when they mean everything the gesture is capable of meaning. Emmett Aldridge returned it with the right hand of a man who had worn a uniform for 6 years before he ever picked up an engineering pencil, and the engine ran behind both of them, steady and restored. Colton drove to the town where Emmett Aldridge lived 4 months later, in the middle of the week, in his personal vehicle, on his own time. He had been thinking about the drive since the morning the engine started. He found Emmett in the back of a small machine shop he operated out of a building behind his house. Not commercial, just a space, a place to think with tools the way some people think with words. The smell of the shop was metal shavings and machine oil, and the particular clean smell of a workspace that is used seriously and maintained accordingly. Emmett looked up when he heard the footsteps. He set down the part he was working on. Colton, he said. I wanted to say something, Colton said. I've been trying to work out how, for a while. Emmett waited. I've been in turbine maintenance for 4 years, Colton said. I thought I was getting good at it. Not arrogant about it, I know how much I don't know. But I thought I was building toward something. Then you walked into that hangar and fixed in 3 hours what my whole team couldn't fix in 31, with a piece of paper from 1977 and a thermometer probe nobody's seen since the Carter administration, and I spent about a week feeling like I'd never actually started. Emmett looked at him. And then? And then I decided that was the wrong thing to feel, Colton said. What I should feel is that I just found out how far there is to go, which is different. Emmett was quiet for a moment. He picked up a cloth and wiped his hands with the same unhurried economy he brought to everything. Roy Callahan told me something, the week before he retired, he said. He said, the engine doesn't care how long you've been looking at it. It will tell you what's wrong when you've learned how to ask. Your job is to keep learning how to ask. He set the cloth down. I'm still learning. I've been at it 50 years, and I'm still learning. The day you feel like you've arrived is the day you stop being useful. Colton nodded. He looked around the shop at the tools arranged with the precision of someone who knows where everything is because everything has been put back in the same place every time, at the workbench with its organized surface, at the engine component on the bench that Emmett had been working on when he arrived. What are you building? Emmett looked at the part. T-58 component. For a museum restoration. Different engine, same principles. He paused. Same problems, if you don't know where to look. He picked the part back up. Colton watched him work for a while and then said goodbye, and Emmett nodded. And Colton walked back out through the machine shop and into the afternoon and sat in his truck for a moment before he started it. He thought about the calibration tables, the folded paper, the pencil columns, the soft fold lines from 47 years of handling. Roy Callahan handing Emmett the probe on his last day. The chain of it. Callahan to Aldridge to the procedure now being written into the technical baseline where it should have been 40 years ago. What it means to carry something forward, not as a monument but as a working thing. Alive only if there is patience enough to pass it on. He started the truck. Back at Fort Campbell, the Apache was on the schedule for the morning, its engine ready, the fault resolved, and entered into the record where it would wait for the next man who needed it. There are people among us right now who carry in their hands the solutions to problems nobody has solved yet. Solutions developed in test facilities decades ago by men who are gone. Kept alive in calibration tables, on folded paper, and thermometer probes passed from mentor to student, in the specific faith that the knowledge will eventually be needed. They drive trucks and run small shops and answer the phone on the 4th ring, and when you tell them the problem, they go quiet for a moment and say, I think I know what it is. The engine was never dead. It was waiting for someone who remembered how to ask. If you were moved by Emmett Aldridge's story of quiet mastery and timeless dedication, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes.